Well, good evening, everybody. Welcome to our Bible talk this evening. This evening we continue our series on the Nativity, in particular, what we can learn from those around Jesus at his birth. When a baby is born, it knows nothing of the months of anticipation leading to its arrival into the world. It does not see the nervousness and excitement of parents, family, future friends, all those who will make the world a loving and hospitable place. Rarely does anyone want anything else for a newborn child. Human beings, despite their faults, usually intend to look after the youngest in their care, and when they do not, they face being shunned by society. Yet the story of Jesus was completely divisive from the word go, the subject of the greatest clash of wills ever seen, from the breathtaking story of his birth to the tragedy and triumph of his sacrifice 33 years later. With these circumstances in mind, we can learn a lot from the reaction of those around him just before his birth and when it actually happened. In many ways, their thoughts and actions were already put in place by the attitudes they developed in the years leading up to it, and their precarious positions in the world. The adults present at the birth of this tiny child, and those who had influence over his world, were able to choose what they believed, and, crucially, whether to accept God's plan of hope and salvation. When Jesus was born, they showed their moral standards and their level of acceptance of the divine plan. Mary, the mother of Jesus, is now one of the more well-known figures in religious circles. She is revered almost beyond any other by those in the Catholic faith. But in general, she is held in high esteem by most Christian denominations. It is strange to think of her humble origins in contrast to the many statues, paintings, and church decorations which have been created in what is meant to be her image. Mary was a relative of Elizabeth, who was in turn the wife of a man called Zechariah, a senior Jewish priest. Mary's life does not seem to have been so prominent as that of Elizabeth and Zechariah, and when God sent the angel Gabriel to Mary, the message shocked her to the core. This angel was indeed a messenger, sent as a traveller might come to a town on their journey, and he came into the house of Mary not to seek food and lodgings, but to tell her how closely she would be related to God's plan and purpose. Although this was a great honour, it was terrifying for a humble and relatively powerless young woman to be given the task of bearing God's Son. Having become engaged to Joseph, a descendant of David, perhaps she had dreamed of becoming one of the faithful women leading up to the glorious birth of a Messiah, but never expected this event to come home to her. More than this, the Roman influence, clashing with Judea's native religious and bureaucratic authorities, meant that she was going to be in the crosshairs of so many people who already wished for more power and did not want another person in the race to contend with. But Mary listened and worked to understand the message of God through his servant Gabriel. She accepted that the grace of God, which now rested on her, his undeserved favour, worked on both her behalf and that of the people who would be saved. Whatever the challenges ahead, this was the time that God had given for a plan to be put in place. We see how Mary did not, at any point, ask for this task to be taken away. In Luke chapter 1, verse 38, she gave her body and will to the service of God. It is a difficult level of dedication to achieve, and we can only be inspired by this. However, in the dark days of our current world, we can also be reassured that God has a purpose in the lives of all those who serve him, humbly and even in the most difficult circumstances. Mary was not just a political target. She also knew what it meant to face poverty and hunger, as we see in verses 52 and 53. Next week, when you can join us again, we will read Mary's song in this part of the record of Luke and look at its spiritual meaning. Mary's relative, Elizabeth, also took on an immense task. Elderly and also pregnant by another miracle, she looked after her cousin for 3 months, and we can speculate that perhaps this was to avoid any suggestion that Mary had been with Joseph about the time that she conceived. Or maybe it was the case that Joseph was working hard to carry out his trade and provide for his future family. Whatever the case, the pregnant Mary, in a house where a miraculous sign was already occurring, was a sure target for anyone who wished this family line to be extinguished. Together, these two women weathered the storm and kept the fires of faith burning until John the Baptist was born. And Zechariah, in Luke 1 verse 73 to 75, said that God had given them the privilege of being the family involved, since they had been rescued from the hand of their enemies to serve God without fear. When it was confirmed that Mary was pregnant, Joseph felt he could no longer continue with their marriage. But an angel appeared also to him and confirmed the extraordinary circumstances. He too was told not to be afraid and accepted that the will of God could overturn his emotion and the struggle to justify his marriage. Joseph had an important part to play, as he could bring up Jesus in the line and faithful tradition of David. Joseph was also given a sign that God wanted them to work together as a family. Just as Gabriel had told Mary that God was with her, now Joseph was given Emmanuel as another name for Jesus. This showed that God was not just with Mary alone. In this case, God was with all the faithful, as Emmanuel means God with us. The Bible reads out and emphasizes this translation in Matthew chapter 1. Joseph could still easily have decided that this was all too controversial and that he still wanted to divorce Mary, but he did not. We can learn how we should react when God wants us to change our minds, something that he wants every human being to do, so that they can accept salvation. Hundreds of years earlier, David had started his career as a shepherd, some time before he became the servant of the king, and then the king of Israel himself. And then at the time of the birth of Jesus, as people were gathered for the census of Caesar Augustus, the humble shepherds of that era were also willing to spend as long as possible out in their fields, perhaps leaving it until the last minute to register their existence in the vast Roman Empire. They were barely sleeping or doing anything else in order to protect their flocks. This was the selfless spirit of David himself, and it is no wonder that they were called by the angels to see the Son of God. They could understand the need for this servant of God more than anyone else, and they also trusted God to provide for their flocks whilst they went and found out the good news and then spread the word. From this, we learn the need to work humbly and quietly in the pattern of all God's servants in the past, and then when we are called to something more noble, to do it with the trust and willingness that is needed. In our introductory video, some of the quotes are from the stories of two people who were waiting for the coming of Jesus outside his immediate family, and those who were local to him at the time. Towards the middle of Luke chapter 2, we have the record of Simeon and Anna. Simeon was a devout follower of God, and Anna was a prophetess. Both were looking forward to an opportunity for Israel to be redeemed. Both were very old, and both had experienced a long wait. It is clear that although they felt that this wait had come to an end with the arrival of the newborn Christ, they also knew that there was much to come. As they held the young Jesus, They saw that they would die, and whilst they slept, more and more people would come to know the glory of God, his purpose, and the reason why he had provided a son. They had confidence that this was the start of an amazing chapter in human history, which would point forward to a better future for them and for everyone else who accepted the gospel. God's plan was personal in their lives, but it affects so many others, right down to us. It makes us humble and alive, and willing for others to learn. From Luke chapter 2, verses 30 and 31, "You have prepared it in the presence of all peoples, a light for revelation to the Gentiles, and glory to your people Israel." We started off by mentioning controversy, then looked at the story of Mary and Elizabeth, and Joseph. And then it may seem that the trail has gone cold. But the reaction of the rulers to Jesus' arrival was not just cynical, it was downright evil. They did not even decide to question the power of Jesus or find a way to negotiate with it, but instead they tried to eliminate it. In Matthew 2, verse 16 to 18, we see how Herod's reaction was quite unlike that of the faithful. He carried out a terrible act of genocide in a failed attempt to root out God's Son, which he should have known could never have been successful. Herod's reaction seemed worse than that of the religious elite of the same era, but in reality they caused the spiritual equivalent. As we read about the early part of the work of Christ, in Matthew chapters 4 and 5, we see how Jesus later spoke vividly of the contrast between the light of the true message of hope compared to the dark situation around him and his followers. For those who take the meaning of Jesus' life and work to heart and remember his death and resurrection, the lives of ancient, faithful followers can be an inspiration far beyond any suffering which is stirred up by those who want power here and now. Although the Gospel of John does not contain the narrative of Christ's childhood, it does provide a fascinating and unique look at the principles behind it. John tells us how enduring this event was, and how necessary it was, and how God has always planned to use his Son as a force for good in the world. The light will always succeed, and it has never been possible to prevent it from shining. John 1, verses 4 to 5. "In him was life, and that life was the light of men. That light shines in the darkness, and yet the darkness did not overcome it." Next Sunday at 10 a.m, join us on Facebook, YouTube, or our website at theoneway.net. Whatever you're up to on Christmas Day, whether you celebrate this festival or whether you have a different view, take a few minutes to explore the circumstances of the birth of Jesus, to think once again about our reaction to his work, and to find out whether this really is the same time of year when he was born. Then, throughout 2023, we're hoping to bring you some more explanations of the hope we find in the Bible. It's a message which is worth finding and helps make sense of our lives, so please look out for more videos and other content. For now, though, from all of us at the Reigate and Banstead Dawn Christadelphians, we extend to you the peace and goodwill of the Bible's message as we head into a busy couple of weeks. Thank you for watching.